Hello, my name is Philip Mazur. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Communication Science at the Vrije University Amsterdam, and I'd like to present a study that helps to understand the impact of conceptual and analytical choices on finding the privacy paradox. And essentially, this study is a specification curve analysis of large-scale survey data. Let's start with the privacy paradox itself. It refers to the observation that online privacy concerns do not necessarily lead to privacy behaviors. More specifically, over the last 10 years, many studies have investigated the privacy paradox and often did not find a significant relationship between online privacy concerns and, for example, information disclosure. Over time, however, some studies did find this relationship and questioning the privacy paradox again. Today, after 10 years of research, we have several literature reviews, we have a meta-analysis, sometimes suggesting that privacy behavior online indeed is paradox, sometimes suggesting that it's not paradox. Overall, we have very inconsistent findings, and it seems that our understanding of the concept and of the phenomena is almost become blurred. One of the problems is that different researchers attempt to test the privacy paradox in different ways. And with this in the back of our minds, I want to introduce something that has been now known as the garden of forking path. Every time we analyze data and we try to test a hypothesis, we of course somehow construe this data set. And what I mean by that is that we start with one data set that we have collected, but we take several decisions that may change the data set before we actually test the hypothesis. So for example, in a first step, we have to decide what to focus on in the data set. Do we create a certain subset? This can mean excluding outliers. This can also mean focusing on a specific population of the data set. In the next step, we may have to decide whether we need to transform our data. Do we want to estimate indices? Do we want to use a latent estimation approach? Do we need to transform our data, log transformation, for example? And this, of course, leads again to a different data set. Now, if we continue this path, we have to decide, for example, which other variables to include. Are there any confounders that we need to control for? And of course, we also need to decide what model to use in order to actually test our hypothesis. This could be a regression model, a logistic model, a analysis of variance, Bayesian estimation approach. And within this garden of forking path, it is not always easy to say which one is the best specification, and surely not whether our own decisions actually led to the best specification. This is particularly because at some points within this garden of forking path, the decisions are not clearly justifiable. Sometimes they're arbitrary, theoretically equally defensible. And this, of course, can produce then a variety of results even based on one data set, and if we consider now the entire literature on the privacy paradox, perhaps inconsistent results, because of course researchers go down very different paths to test the privacy paradox. Now, with this study, I wanted to explore and investigate these researchers' degrees of freedoms on testing the privacy paradox in a more systematic manner. And I did this by doing a secondary data analysis of the Eurobarometer surveys. These are large-scale cross-sectional surveys, in this case from 2011, 2015, and 2019. They were always representative for all 27 countries of the European Union. And I used a so-called specification curve analysis to explore these different paths towards testing the same type of hypothesis. So this means running all theoretically plausible specification and then investigating the entire multiverse of results. And this is typically done by using a visualization. Now, this slide here represents an overview of the specifications that I investigated based on these data sets. And what I tried to do is find out the most common ways of testing the privacy paradox in the literature and recreate the typical decisions using these data sets. I'm not going to go into depth into the exact decisions that I took here. I invite you to go into the paper and learn about how these decisions relate to the literature. But what is important now is I did two analyses. The first one is concerns predicting information disclosure based on the Eurobarometer from 2011. And the second analysis is concerns predicting privacy setting use based on the Eurobarometer 2015 and 2019. Overall, the number of specifications for both analyses were roughly 100. Now let's get into the results. This is the specification curve for the first analysis, so privacy concerns predicting information disclosure. And as you can see, we have a broad range of results across these 108 specifications, and a large part is indeed negative, insignificant, so in a way disconfirming the privacy paradox. But there's a wide range of effect sizes. Sometimes it's really small and non-significant, other times it's quite large and significant. The median here is in unstandardized regression coefficient a minus 0.157. Now, with regard to the second analysis, privacy concerns predicting privacy setting use on social media, the results were a lot more consistent. Here, all specifications resulted in a positive, significant relationship, and the differences in effect sizes was not as strong. The median here was an odds ratio of 1.258. Now, we can ask, for example, where does the variance in effect sizes across these specifications come from? And in the first analysis, 71% of the variance in the effect sizes stem from using a different independent variable. So in other words, different types of measures for privacy concerns. In the second analysis, the most of the variance stems from the different data collection points on the one hand, as well as on whether one looked at younger or older participants. Now let's look at that in a bit more detail. This is a visualization of the specification curve analysis for the first analysis. And here we can see 78.7% resulted in a significant and negative relationship, thus overall disconfirming the privacy paradox. But there's quite a large variance in the effect sizes. We see here that depending on what type of measure we use for privacy concerns, this leads to largely different effect sizes. In some, we can say that the more specific and the more compatible the privacy concern is to the dependent variable information disclosure, the larger the effect size. So, for example, measuring just general concerns about, for example, online behavior being recorded led mostly to insignificant results. We can also see that control variables clearly matter, but there's no obvious pattern. One cannot say this particular control variable changes the effect size in a certain type of way. But what we can clearly see is the effect or the relationship between concerns and information disclosure is stronger for older participants versus younger participants. With regard to predicting privacy setting use, we see here that all relationships become significant and were positive. There's less variance in the effect sizes. There is no clear pattern with regard to the control variables, and they do not matter as much as well. But we see on the one hand that here again, age matters, but the other way around. There are stronger effects for younger participants. And finally, we also see that the relationship became stronger over time. So the relationship was stronger in 2019 compared to 2015. Now, what can we learn from this? First of all, the privacy paradox seems to be disconfirmed by this overall analysis, but we learn something more for how to proceed with testing and investigating the privacy paradox. First of all, I think we need to be fully cognizant of the degrees of freedom and that one single data set can lead to various large multiverse of results depending on what type of decisions one takes. So pre-registering our analysis to ensure transparency is really important, and we need to provide detailed justifications for our decisions. This is sometimes or very often lacking. I believe we should also stop focusing on statistical significance and investigate effect sizes instead. And just very generally speaking, we need more systematic analysis of the available literature in order to understand what type of decisions lead to what type of results, and really acknowledging that these decisions matter. So as a conclusion, results can be heavily contingent on analytical decisions, particularly in the literature on the privacy paradox. Undisclosed flexibility may be the reason for some of the large inconsistencies in the published literature on the privacy paradox. And finally, I believe specification curve analysis can help to gain insights into these effects of analytical decisions and thus help to establish best practices. And with that, I'd like to thank for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions, and I would also like to invite you to read the paper, which goes into much more depth, both with regard to the methodology as well with regard to what this means for studying the privacy paradox. Thank you.